9 that talks about this supernatural, miraculous event, the transfiguration of Jesus. Let's hear that reading.
About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and enveloped them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and told no one at the time what they had seen.
Thank you. You can be seated. It's quite a different kind of event that we're going to try to hash out here. But first, there are events recorded all through the Old Testament in which God insisted that the people remember the miracle by which they came to know him. For example, there is an event recorded in the book of Joshua where God dried up the Jordan River so that the children of Israel could cross it safely. And so after that event, God told them to go and place stones at the river so that they would always remember and so that future generations would hear. Now, the reason he did this was because you'd think that if you experienced a miracle, you'd always remember. But the truth is, we don't. Christians forget all the time the things that are impossible for us but have happened because they're infinitely possible for God. We're kind of like Jesus' disciple Peter in that regard. You might remember that he is one who would say one moment something like, "I will follow you, Jesus." And then the next moment, because he was consumed with fear, he'd deny even knowing Christ. And so I have a very unscientific method for determining how well a congregation as a whole remembers. When they have a congregation meeting, when do they talk about their budget? See, my experience is that when they talk about it first on the agenda, that they're not going to talk much about anything else, and they'll conclude, we just don't have enough. And it doesn't matter if God is placing something in front of them that is so clear to go and do, they'll say, let's sit still. The same thing is true of your own personal budgets, I would imagine. But if the talk is at the end of the meeting, their discussions generally aren't going to be about what they don't have. Instead, they're going to take time to talk about what God is leading them to do so that they may go and save souls, tell the story. And yes, they're going to take some time to talk about stuff that seems impossible. They're going to envision a future that seems out of reach, and it's true. When they get to the point where they have to talk about how to pay for it, no. They're not going to have any more money than if it had been the first thing that they talked about. But now there's a good chance they're going to seek God's power in their lives, to live in them and to flow through them so that his will may be done in the world. They're not going to sit idle. They're going to move. And that's the kind of Christian that God is calling us to be today. And it's the kind of church that he's calling us to be. So, thinking about that, what we're called to be, do you know what the biggest stumbling block is for people when it comes to going to church? Churches. And do you know what makes it hard for some people to envision themselves as Christians? Christians. I can attest to that. The church has been both the most exhilarating institution I have ever been a part of. And at times, it has also been the most deflating. You know, and a lot of you have been there with me. You love the music. You love the worship. You like the seeing of your friends and your neighbors. You've experienced many blessings being a part of a church community. And yet, if you've ever been connected at all, then I can say for sure that it's hurt you. And there have been decisions that have been made that you don't understand or that you just don't agree with. At times, some of you have perceived that too much is asked of you. And church leaders, they can never, ever live up to the expectations that people have for them. And so there's always this kind of ingrained disappointment with them. Churches are imperfect places with imperfect people. It stands to reason that sinners, every now and then, they're going to sin. And this is why, at least according to one popular poll, 80% of people have said, I can be a good Christian without ever going to church. I bet that everyone here has heard somebody say something like that. And there are going to be some people who believe that no matter what I say. And some people just don't want to get up and go to church. And so, you know, it's kind of hard to get through to them. But no matter where you're at in that argument, you do need to understand this. The Christian church and our role as a part of that church, as a part of the body of Christ, is of paramount importance to Jesus. See, a lot of times we talk about faith as being personal, and it is, but nowhere in the Bible will you find it being described as private. You know, before Jesus died, he prayed a prayer. And it takes up about 25% of the Gospel of John. And in it, he prays about the people he's dying for, what he wants them to look like in the future, who they should really be. Now, if I told you you were going to die next week, and I asked you to write a journal for the next 7 days, I would have to assume that anything that took up 25% of the words is something that's really important to you. And also, I'd have to come to the conclusion that I didn't really know you at all if I don't know about what you had written. Now, in the same way, and this is important, especially for those of you who kind of think of church as just someplace to go, to listen a little bit passively and then duck out until the next time you come back. Unless we're really trying to figure out what it means to be a part of the Christian church, and to a lesser extent, a church like this, Shepherd of the Lakes, or if you're a visitor today, whatever church you go to, then we are going to have a hard time what it means to understand how to live a life with Jesus, to live a real life of faith, because the church is what Jesus died for to create. He didn't die so that individuals could experience some peace and happiness and some groovy vibes by pushing a button. He died for the whole world, we read, and he died to make us into a community. And he says that through our life in that community, we can receive his gifts and be in fellowship and have awesome power in our lives to be transformed.